I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. And today, finally, someone has sent in video questions for the community. So we're going to be watching those today, sent in by Teacher Andrew, also known as Andrew O'Neill. He asked us about what documents you need to have here in country for different things you're going to be doing if you're a long-term tourist or an expat when you're doing paperwork renewals. He also wants to know what you do with an apartment when you're not going to be in it. But we're going to get to his details right after the bump. All right, I'm pretty excited that Teacher Andrew sent in some video questions for the show, partially because it just mixes things up, but it's also super cool to get to meet you guys. I do the live streams on a regular basis, and I get to talk to you guys in real time via the chat and have feedback, but that's not the same as getting to see you. So having him send in videos to put on the show makes for a much more robust and vibrant experience here on the show, but it's really cool for me to kind of get a face-to-face with you guys as well. So this is really exciting. But before we get into anything else, let's just have Andrew tell us what it is he's looking for. All right, Andrew, I'll let you take it from here.
So the first one off the top of my head has to do with like sensitive documents. So the first question would be, would you suggest bringing original documents such as Social Security card, driver's license, and birth certificate, marriage certificate, things like that?
Hey guys, Future Scott here jumping in. I missed this one while I was editing. I picked up on what was being said, and I want to just interrupt, sorry Andrew, and say, so Social Security cards were mentioned, and Social Security is important because it's American only, so if you're not American, this doesn't matter, but these are not an identity document. They are a part of your Social Security program for retirement. The number on your Social Security card does not identify you, but it can be used for nefarious purposes because loads of businesses in the United States are inherently insecure and they don't give you an identifier. Your universities often do this too. They use a combination of your name and your Social Security number together and kind of make up an ID, and sometimes there are collisions and people can be misidentified because there's more than one person with the same Social Security number. That's a real thing. Your number can also be guessed, so it causes a lot of problems. So Social Security cards have no legitimate function in the real world, yet are a security concern. So because of this, no country in the world recognizes your Social Security number as anything. It is a meaningless number. Even in the United States, it is legally not an identifier. It says right on the Social Security card, this is not an ID. It is simply a weird mechanism that is used for this one weird purpose of retirement instead of your national ID. Your national ID, which is not available for everyone, exists solely on your passport. Your passport number is the only identifier that you have internationally. So it's really important. So the idea that you would take a Social Security card with you out of the United States should never cross your mind. That card is exclusively valuable inside the United States. It should always be kept inside the United States. It should always be kept incredibly protected. There is, as far as I know, no scenario where you should ever present it in person unless a government agency makes you do so. You should never be giving out a physical Social Security card. It is not meant to be used that way. It is not meant to be carried around. It is never supposed to travel, and it is never supposed to be used as an ID. So just really important, because in case anyone has ever had this cross their mind that maybe you'd need it somewhere, maybe you should have it with you, absolutely 100% never let it leave your safe unless it is for you to take out and make a very careful copy or to verify your number or something. It is not something that should ever be in your wallet. It should never travel. Even within the United States, it should never be with you, right? There is no function, no hospital, no government agency, nothing will ever require it. As long as you're inside the United States, traveling with a driver's license or similar state-issued ID is adequate. Anywhere else in the world or at any time you want to have a passport. Passport always trumps a state ID. It is your federal ID. It is your sole federal ID in the United States and in most of the world. Lots of countries have national ID separate from passports. And here in Nicaragua, for example, that is your cedula. And so if you become a resident, you get a national ID number with your cedula. The United States lacks this, and your passport is the only mechanism you have as a positive, solid, uniform, federal level identifier within the United States. So yes, you always travel with passport, never with a social security card. Can't say it strongly enough. So just in case anyone ever crossed their minds that you might want to take a social security card, the answer will always be no, no exceptions. No one should ever be telling you otherwise, because that is outrageously dangerous and risky. Replacing it, big problem, not something you want to have to do. So just keep it in a safe and move on.
To Nicaragua with you, or would you suggest leaving them home with some family safe in their house and just bringing a copy of all of those things? So I guess there's two questions there. Would you bring originals or would you bring copies? And then the second question is, which ones would you need to bring? Like, what do you need? What does the embassy ask for, or what have you needed to use in order to, like, either renew your driver's license or whatever it is that you've had to renew at the border or at the embassy? So that's the first question. And actually, I'm just gonna back up for a second here. I don't even think I introduced myself. So this is Teacher Andrew, right? You've mentioned me a bunch of times. That's a regular viewer, and my whole name is Andrew O'Neill. So it just doesn't, I guess it doesn't show it on my comments or whatever, that I'm Andrew O'Neill. So that's my whole name. And I've been following your channel for a while. I appreciate it.
All right, let's talk about documents. So surprisingly, you don't actually need a lot of documents when you're going to be here in Nicaragua. There are a few things that you should bring with you, absolutely, and they must be originals. And those are your passport and your driver's license. You're always going to need to have those no matter what you're doing, even if you're just here as a tourist. Technically, you're allowed to come with just a passport. You don't have to have a driver's license. But presumably, if you have a driver's license, you're going to want the option, at least, of being able to get behind the wheel and go somewhere. Even though I often recommend not driving, that doesn't mean you don't want to carry your driver's license just in case. And if you watch some of my other videos, I generally recommend for a lot of people a lot of the time to consider not carrying their passport when moving around the country. Technically, having your passport on you at all times is a requirement. So if you're just here for a few days, you probably want to keep it in your pocket, but make sure you have pockets that are pretty secure. People aren't really interested in stealing your passport. That's a thing that people talk about a lot, but it's not very much of a real fear. I've never heard of anyone having their passport stolen. There's very little ability to use your passport in any way when it's taken from you, and getting it replaced is relatively easy. Annoying, of course, but it's not like someone can extort you for it or sell it for a lot of money. So in general, it's not the kind of thing that people are going to target. Maybe if you left it out on a table, people might just swipe it and see if they can figure out what to do with it, but it's not the kind of thing they're going to, like, really look to try to get from you. They're going to be looking for money or phones or maybe a watch, something of that nature, but nothing like a passport. Just very difficult for someone who has stolen a document to use, much like your driver's license would not be very much use to someone. So keeping your passport on you is not too big of a deal, but you want to be very careful not to lose it, of course, and wearing it out is a real possibility if it never leaves your pocket. So we generally don't want to carry it around. I like to keep it in a safe at home, or at least someplace that's relatively secure, because I never know when I'm going to take things out of my pocket, something's going to fall. It's just, there's too much to go wrong, at least for me. So even though you're not supposed to, I do often move around the country without a passport. And what I do, but I always carry my driver's license. If I get stopped, I show my driver's license, and say, look, my passport is in my house, in my hotel, whatever. I can go get it. Like, it's going to take some time. You might get in some trouble, but for me, overall, the risk of maybe getting in trouble about that is less than the risk of losing my passport. Some people will definitely argue that it is better to take the risk of losing your passport rather than get in that trouble. I can't tell you which is actually the lesser of the two evils, but there's always some amount of risk. I choose to rarely carry my passport. And at this point, my wife does not carry her passport either. And I know very few expats who do when they're doing normal things. And the number of times, this is worth mentioning, the number of times that I've been asked for my passport in the 3 years that I've been here. To be clear, when I'm out and about, there are times you have to produce your passport, you will know and you'll take it with you, like if you're going to Migración. But under normal circumstances, when I'm moving around the country, I do not need my passport. I was asked for it one time in the middle of the night, and we pled innocence, and they eventually let us go after yelling at us for a little bit. We may have paid a small fine, but that was it. Like, it was no big deal, and it was absolutely, having been caught without my passport, the answer is it was way better not to have my passport. Had I kept for 3 years my passport in my pocket every day, I would have lost it by now for sure. So it's worked out pretty well not carrying it. But having my driver's license every time I'm pulled over, driver's license, insurance, registration for the car, everything's good to go. No problems whatsoever. I've never been stopped on the street. The time that I needed my passport, I was not driving. It was that we were pulled over in a van, and they checked everyone's passports because it was a expat passenger van, and that was the one thing. In the middle of the night, very rare. Generally not a thing, but officially, yes, you are supposed to have it. So, don't be surprised if you are adding a little bit of risk, but that's one thing. So I have a whole video about why I made that risk assessment, and that was over a year ago, and it's held up. It was probably a year and a half ago, so I'd only been living here solidly for a year and a half. Now it's been 3 years. I would give the same assessment after all that time. So those are the only two documents that I really recommend under normal circumstances having with you, especially if you're a tourist, right? So now he asked in the video a little bit about what you would do for renewing some things. So let's talk about that. So for Migracion, you definitely need copies of your birth certificate, marriage certificates, anything like that you may have those things and have copies, but not the originals. Leave the originals, as Andrew said, in a safe somewhere back in your home country, United States, in this particular example. That's the best thing. And if you can have someone who can get to them and send a photocopy if necessary, great. If you're going to be doing something like applying for residency, they will need some official documents. They'll tell you at the time, but generally it is your documents in apostille. Apostille is not your original. That means you go to your government, presumably in the US, but normally it's your state government, not your federal government, if you're in the US. Other places, I'm sure it's your federal government. And they produce documents in the foreign language and guarantee that they are original or whatever. It's not a big process, but it's not something they do every day. In Texas, it was very silly. We had to go to the State Department, have it printed, go to a FedEx location. They would notarize it. Like, it was weird. They'd say, yep, you really handed us this paper. We're like, what does that prove? They're like, nothing. It's all just meaningless paperwork. And then they would give us the documents in apostille. We would file them, and away we went. Those you will need, but generally you don't need originals. Foreign governments don't generally need originals of your documents, especially as they can't identify what are originals. If you have good copies, they don't know what they look like. So that's often the case. So definitely driver's license, definitely passport. To the best of my knowledge, there's no need to have any paperwork for renewing your passport beyond your passport itself. However, you would definitely want a driver's license while you don't have a passport when you're dealing with your embassy. Under normal circumstances, you do not deal with the embassy. I know of no people who have spoken of going to the U.S. Embassy here in Nicaragua. That's not to say it's useless or that they're not there to help you or whatever. It's just, what would you need from the embassy? Of course, if you lose your passport, you do need to go to the embassy, and you'll really appreciate that they're there. And it's good to know where they are and that kind of stuff, but you don't need to check in with them. You don't need to use them on a day-to-day basis. If you do need to renew your passport, that is the place to go. I have not had to renew my passport yet, and so there's a bit of, I don't know exactly what they're going to require as far as that goes, but I do not believe that they need your birth certificate or anything like that, because you don't generally need that when renewing your passport. They already know who you are. They already know that they've issued you a passport. They can check their systems and verify that that passport is real. They can verify that it has not been reported stolen. They know that it is up for renewal, and they issue you a new one. They're not providing it to someone who didn't have the passport previously. They're not proving that you still have been born in the United States. They've already done all that. So I don't believe that any specific paperwork is required for that, but don't quote me. I'm not 100% sure. I've never tried to do a foreign passport renewal, and it's been a long time since I did my American passport renewal, because I'm an adult and they last for a long time. So I don't think you would need anything like that. If you do, you'll probably have lots and lots of warning. It depends how much time you have on your passport, of course, but generally it's not going to be a big thing. For other things like driver's license, it's going to vary by state, but generally you don't need anything for that either. Normally you can mail in and ask for a new one, or you can do it online. I know that some places do it online, and some places like Utah now have digital driver's licenses, so you don't even have to have something sent to you. Like, it's super easy. But then here, they're not really equipped to deal with digital driver's licenses, so they're not sure what to do, and you have to convince them that that's your license. Like, they don't exactly honor the U.S. licenses. They're not familiar with them, so that can be a little bit of a problem. But that's the real license. But in general, you don't need very much. The amount of paperwork you're going to bring with you should be minimal, especially at the beginning. Presumably, at some point, you are going to return to your home country, either just to visit or whatever, over the course of years. And generally, you're not looking at a passport renewal or applying for residency within the first 18 months at least. And so whatever paperwork you're going to need, which can change over time, you will find out. Now, as far as the driver's license renewal, I would say check with your state and just see what their requirements are for foreign renewal or for out of state renewal. Just so you have that information. But everything here in country will be copies other than your passport itself. Well, thanks, Teacher Andrew, for the question. And he has another. This is fantastic. This is really cool. So I just want to say, if any of you have questions or ideas for stuff on the show, I do love all the ideas of things I need to do, but the ones that are like, go out and interview people, that's going to take me some time. I'm traveling soon, and it's just, I've been very busy. I've not been able to get out. We're having our car fixed. I just haven't been able to drive places. But I do want to do that stuff. Absolutely, definitely coming. And, we'll try to do that stuff. But if it's things I can answer, those I can make on a day-to-day basis, not like in a few weeks, in a few months sort of thing. But if you have any questions like that, get down there in those comments and let me know down there. That helps make things like this possible. It's how we know what to say. Or even better, like Andrew's doing, take a video of yourself and send them in. He used Google Drive, but we've got WeTransfer.com. I've got a video that has the details on that. I'm going to start putting that into the regular comments, hopefully, so that you know how to do it. But if you can, 4K, 30p, front-facing camera, good light on your face, and you can send up to 2 gigs through that right to me. Or you can use something like Google Drive, whatever you have. That works out great too. So, but thanks so much to Andrew, who jumped in and made this possible as the first ones. And without further ado, let's check out his next question. All right, take it away, Andrew.
The second question has to do with renting an apartment or a house in Nicaragua. If we were to go, let's just say, and I have a need or a reason to go back to the United States for a few months or something. I know you covered this as if you like own a house, like you get a separate house for a family who can then take care of your house. I get that part. But what about if you have an apartment with all your stuff in there? Do you then just find a trustworthy friend to then live in there or check in on it for a while and pay them to do that? Or is there another, or like if your apartment's locked and it's only a few months, should it not be something you worry about? Anyway, as long as you bring all your like big items, like your laptop and stuff like that, whatever you don't want to lose. Anyway, but that's another big question I have, which I don't think you've quite answered in the different videos that you've had. I know you have a lot in there though.
All right, so really good questions. Let's dig into this. So presumably you're talking about an apartment, not an entire house. I'll try to address both as best that I can. If you have a more traditional apartment, and I'll use Marcella as an example because she has an apartment here in Leon, and it is in a pretty standard design for apartments here. Remember, we don't have big apartment buildings most of the time. There are a few, like in Managua, but in general, you're going to deal with a very different design than you're used to in the United States. It doesn't make it bad, it's just different. Of the ones that she has here, she has a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment that she uses in the city of Leon, and it's in a double-gated thing. So there's a full, incredibly high, very secure wall with heavy security, not people, but like lots of bolting and locks and very high walls on the outside. And then inside is a relatively small apartment building, maybe 4 or 5 apartment units. And we just saw a new one of these be announced in, I believe, 4th Avenue in Fatima, in Reparto, Fatima, in the north side. That's very similar for like $260 a month here in Leon, in a really nice area where you have this outside security. So it's like a gated community, but a really tiny one, but for just one apartment building rather than for a group of houses. But it gives you much the same feeling in a lot of ways. So people just, you have like a key, you unlock the outside gate, you go in, and then you have the apartment units. There's a lot of visibility from one to another. So if you were living in a place like that, you might worry that the people in your apartment building would be aware that you were going to be gone, and maybe that's a risk. But in general, those are very secure because it's extremely hard to get in, and someone who snuck in would have a hard time sneaking out. It actually locks both directions, so someone who gets in would be trapped if they didn't find a good way out. And you wouldn't know which apartment units were empty. So you'd be, if you were trying to rob one of these places, even if you knew one of the occupants was gone for an extended period of time, you're sneaking over a high wall, you're hoping you get the right apartment unit, get the wrong one, you might have an angry person with a machete there to deal with, and you're trapped inside the walls, and they can just lock you out of their apartment, lock you into the area that they're in, and just call the police from there, right? So it's not a great thing if you're a crook looking to get in. Doesn't work out great for you. So those tend to be pretty secure, and she's got security bars on the windows. She has heavily locking doors. The way that hers works, there's a regular door with a deadbolt, but of course there's some chance you can kick that down, right? Maybe not real quickly, but you could get in if you really, really were determined. So outside of that is a metal bars thing. So it's instead of a screen, it's a very, very secure metal door, like thick metal bars, like you'd have over a window. And it locks with a full a padlock. And so when you're home, but you want to have your doors wide open, but you want the security of knowing that absolutely no one can get in. It's not like in the States where if you're home, often we would leave doors open and have a screen door. Then we'd be like, well, hopefully they don't push down the screen door. Like a cat could accidentally rip that down. But here it's like really secure. So if someone was actually like really trying to break in, it would seriously cause some problems for them. Like this is very hard to get through. So that people will leave open so they have all that wind. It's very, very open, but incredibly secure. But when you're not there, you have that on the outside in many cases. You have a regular door on the inside and the same thing on the back door. And then windows tend to have metal bars as well. So the structure of the apartment tends to be very secure. So we talk about the insecurities of houses here. Colonial houses are very insecure by nature. They have the huge open courtyard in the middle, so you have to secure the house from its own interior in order to keep your possessions secure, and you often have things in that atrium area. But with an apartment here, typically the apartment isn't built like that. That would be super weird. And the apartments generally have quite a bit of security for when you're not there, both on the apartment itself and very typically for the apartment complex or building or whatever. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking at, and if you're looking to be a long-term person living in Nicaragua and you're looking for an apartment rather than a house, that is a style I would highly recommend. It can be very nice, very affordable. It's living like, middle-class Nicaraguans who are looking for something a little bit more temporary than permanent. Maybe a teacher or professor. That's actually why the ones that she is in is meant for professors. So most of her neighbors are like that. We see them out at events and stuff that we go to. So it's a very middle-class area, quite safe, very quiet, very, very nice. And you have families there and kids. So that, for a lot of expats who are looking for a Nicaraguan lifestyle on a reasonable budget, but a nice place that's very safe, that type of apartment can be absolutely excellent. And we've seen them vary in price from the higher 100s, maybe 165 to 170, up to the higher 200s, maybe 280, 290. That's kind of the price range for that style of apartment that you would see. I have seen like one bedrooms that are down to like 120 in a similar. Typically for an expat, you're normally going to be looking at a two-bedroom in many cases, just because you want an office space or you want some space to store things or whatever. But if you're looking for something much smaller, those exist as well in more or less the same style. And I have seen ones that have full-time security, like a person who's there in addition to all the things that I mentioned. But generally, there is not. But you do have security from your neighbors. So if you were there and you got to know your neighbors, you'd be very secure from that point as well. They would, be paying attention. They're like, well, he's not here. Nothing should be going on in there. Something's going on. We should call someone, right? So that could provide a lot of protection too, and that's common. Now, of course, you have other options, and you may want to do things, very simple things, right? Like get a small security camera. You don't need a big security system. One little security camera, because presumably if you're keeping the apartment, you're going to keep your internet on. You don't have to have expensive internet. Keep that running for the months that you're not there. You don't want to have to turn it on when you get back anyway. And have a camera so you can look in an apartment and just know that everything is still there. If someone was to break in, you could have a motion sensor. You could get detection. Be very inexpensive and simple to have one camera that does that. And the standard apartments here, it's worth noting, typically have a big open living space. That is just the style here, right? That's kitchen, that's living room, that's dining room. That typically is just open. There might be like dividers, meaning like a small built-in table or a counter or something to break it up. But the most of the space is open air. So having a camera up in the corner could see the entire open public space of the apartment. That's normally where your stuff's going to be. If you wanted to have a second camera in the bedroom, fine, like that you could do that, but you probably wouldn't need it. If someone's going to break in, they're not going to hide in the bedroom all the time. They're going to come in through the main public area. They're going to exit through the main public area, and the stuff they're going to want to take, like your television, would be in the main public area. Sure, they might go into your bedroom, but that you could monitor a place very, very well. If a place was broken into by looking at the living room, you would know. Right, so that could be enough for you. And if you makes friends with your neighbors, you have friends in town, you get to know anybody, even just calling the police, you could call someone and be like, hey, something's going on at my apartment, can you check on it? Or just call the police, hey, someone is clearly in my apartment right now, right? I can see that it is. That could be all you need. But you're right. If you had an apartment, and you were here for any amount of time, likely you're going to have friends, and it would be very easy in a lot of circumstances. It would be not surprising at all to find someone who, especially is younger, living at home, doesn't have any real particular like need to live at home, but it's too costly not to. If you offer them, hey, look, I need a house sitter. And you could even pay them, right? I'll pay you $20 a month, right? And all you have to do is live in my house. Just, pay attention to it. Don't break anything. And otherwise, enjoy it. You're going to get internet, peace and quiet, your own private space, get to live in a different spot. The chances that someone isn't going to jump at that, very low. Like, that's a sweet deal, especially if you're giving them $10, $20 a month for doing it, which you will really not notice, right? If you're working or doing something in the States, and that's like one good meal at McDonald's. But that's a good amount for someone to go through the bother of moving into your apartment. Now, if they have a nice house of their own and stuff, obviously that's going to be a weird hardship, and they're going to be like, I don't really want to do that. Maybe they'll do it as a favor, but then their house is empty. But there's so many people, especially younger, who live with their parents, and especially if you can find someone who works online and is like, well, but I live with my parents, but I work online, and you're like, look, get a couple months, and it's your place, right? You have your own bed, you have a TV, you have internet, you have peace and quiet. That is a sweet deal. Like, I know people who would be absolutely thrilled to get to do that as a break from living with their parents. And it doesn't make them make a big, commitment. They're just house sitting for a little bit. So no, it's not like they're moving out and giving up on something. And their parents and their siblings and whoever else is at home will be like, oh, it's so nice to have a little extra space for, a few months. Especially maybe they don't want them to move away, but it's a nice little break. It's like a vacation, which no one ever gets. So yeah, that would likely be very easy. Hiring someone to watch over your place, of course, also quite easy. It would be very easy to pay someone a little bit, probably a little bit more if you're not going to have them live in it, to stop by, someone who works nearby, lives in the neighborhood, give them, I don't know, $40, $50 a month and be like, hey, could you stop by on your way home? Just make sure everything's kosher at the place. Yeah, no problem. Right. Nice and easy. Maybe they'll sit there and have a beer, and get a little time away from everyone while they're doing it. Who knows? But that kind of thing is not too bad, but that's assuming you have an apartment. In a lot of cases, because your money goes so far, it's very popular to end up with a rental house here instead of an apartment, or an apartment that approximates a house in its style. But that's definitely less common. Had to take a quick break there while the dog threw up because she was eating grass. Anyway, so a lot of people, because of the amount of cost effectiveness that exists, you will often end up getting a small house instead of an apartment, partially because there's just so many more houses than apartments on the market. The lifestyle here in Nicaragua lends itself towards independent house living and not apartments. Partially it's a cultural thing, partially it is a construction cost type thing. It's just a lot of different things come together, and it makes small houses make more sense than apartments. So it's something that throws people off quite a bit. When they come down here, they're expecting to find loads of apartment buildings, and because they'll say, well, you need lower cost housing, you need all these different things. Like, of course you're going to have apartment buildings, but that's not what you actually find generally. What you find is lots of really small houses, and this creates a completely different cultural and visual landscape than is generally expected. But it also means that it's very easy for you to rent or buy, of course, a very small house that you can treat in some ways like an apartment and in some ways like a house. And it's a nice middle ground in a lot of cases, especially people who are looking for a place that's a little bit more quiet. You don't want to have to deal with neighbors. You want to have a little bit of yard. You want to have that feeling of it's my house, it's my space. Personally, I prefer apartments in a lot of cases. I do like apartments. That's one of the things, like you go up to like Guatemala, Costa Rica, loaded with apartments. They're very much like the United States or Canada in that regard, that they have big apartment buildings, and it's a very common cultural thing there. But here, it is not. But it is nice. A lot of people really appreciate that for the same kind of prices they normally associate with an apartment. Figure in most cases you're only looking at an uplift of $10 or $20 a month for an equivalent sized house to an apartment. And it's worth noting, I use Marcella's apartment as an example. There is a house that is almost the exact same dimensions nearby, same neighborhood, same renters, that rents for the exact same price. But one is a standalone house and one is an apartment in an apartment building. But in that particular example, the house is semi-detached. It touches the houses on either side. So in some ways, it acts more like an apartment. It has completely gated interior of its own. It just doesn't share it with another house. So a lot of things are the same, but the price is the same. And you'll find that a lot of places. And in some cases, because houses are more likely to exist a little bit outside the city, you can sometimes get really good deals on houses where you can't on an apartment. Apartments are almost always in the city, not necessarily the city center. In fact, less likely the city center, but in the core barrios where you have a little bit denser population and you just have a place where maybe a building had burned down or was never built and then an apartment structure went in instead of an old-fashioned house. But those are a little bit more popular because you need that density. And in some cases, you have old houses that are converted to apartments that your mileage is going to vary based on what structures are available. But a little bit outside the city, you tend to get these communities, either gated or not, that are just full of small houses. You have little yards. We have done a number of episodes on them, like Casa Leon. We did the Little Pink House episode, and those can be as low, I've seen, as $145. I know they do get cheaper than that, but not much. But generally, with like $300 is kind of a cap for that style community, with most everyone paying between about $165 and $235. It's kind of the sweet spot for most of those structures, but definitely some people are paying upwards of $3 for larger places, 3 bedrooms and so forth. Those, you're still going to have quite a bit of security. And if you get to know your neighbors, again, they're going to keep an eye on your place, but you can't lock them down to the same extreme degree as the apartments. So in that case, you're much more likely going to want to find someone who's willing to live there with your stuff. But obviously, it's even easier to find someone who'd be interested because, like, wow, a whole house that I could just, for a few months, it could be, a really exciting thing for someone in their 20s to have that opportunity for a while. And just have their own space and be able to relax or whatever and get away from all the people. But you could do the same things, right? You could have a camera and just feel confident with that. Those types of break-ins really aren't that common, but if you are going to be away for a long time and your house is really obviously empty and your house is a little bit more exposed where people walking by can see it, like in Casa Leon, if you were there, people going up and down the streets, even though they're very quiet streets, yes, they might notice that your house was dark for a few months, and it doesn't take much of word to get around that the gringo is not around. People may not notice you on the street or whatever. Be like, I bet their place is empty. And because it has a yard around it, in many cases you can get to the backyard and try to break in through a less visible doorway. That kind of stuff can happen. Of course, if you have the big metal doors, again, that's a lot of security. Some of those places have like chain link that goes around them, and you can look at the individual scenario and decide exactly how much security you want to have for a few months and how much stuff you're leaving in the house and so forth. But definitely getting someone to live there or check in on it, not a big deal at all. And if you're in a gated community with 24/7 security, you can use that as a gauge and say, oh, well, I'm leaving this place. Like, for example, where we are, we have 24/7 armed security. If we were going to be away for a bit of time, we would easily say to them, hey, this is your job. Make sure that we would not have a worry in the world, because we have significant security. There might as well be armed guard. I mean, there is like an armed guard living in the house for all intents and purposes. He sits in the front yard instead of inside the house, but they can even enter the house if they needed to inspect things and make sure that everything is fine. Of course, we have pets, so we never have an empty house. Our dogs are so nervous if she's back there somewhere that we just going to dinner is often a problem. We always try to leave someone behind with the dogs because they don't like even going for 30 to 60 minutes alone. So we have an extreme situation that's a little bit different. But in general, leaving a house is not going to be too big of a problem, right? And the number of times that I've heard of someone who's had to deal with an attempted break-in or anything of the sort, while it does happen, absolutely, and it is a reason to be concerned, and it is a thing to think about and gauge and maybe take some precautions, but we don't hear about this on a day-to-day basis. It's not like, oh, it's constantly happening, someone's always trying to break in. I think that was a lot more common in the past. There's a lot of stories of that, and we do know people who have had to deal with it in the last 2 years, for example, but in general, It is extremely rare, even here, right? More common than in the US, no question, especially if you have an empty house, right? Armed robbery, very unlikely, but finding a house that is empty and then making an effort to get into it is definitely more likely to happen here than in the US. So some precautions do make sense, but some basic ones would be very easy to take, and I don't think you'd have too much of a problem. Of course, if you're going to be away for a longer period of time, it is potentially worth it to get a really tiny apartment that is definitely in a more locked down place, but a place that is absolutely tiny, and use it as a bodega or a storehouse, and just put all your stuff in boxes and not pay for internet, not pay for anything, right? Keep it as absolutely minimum as you can. And then, and lots of locks on everything. That would be more secure, because it would never show up as having been a house, and no one would think anything of it. And they wouldn't know that there was a gringo who had stuff there, that there might be a TV, right? There might be some little bit nicer thing to break in and get. They'll just assume it's an empty place, and they don't want to get caught breaking into something that has nothing of value. It would be a very, very poor risk-reward ratio on that. So that could be an option as well if you're going to be gone a little bit longer. Hope that answers your question. I got to get ready for tonight's live stream, which is coming up here in about an hour and a half. Thanks for joining me. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sending those in. That is fantastic. I know you had a third question. I got to save that one for when I talk to my wife, because she does all the luggage stuff. I just carry the luggage. I do not do any of the luggage planning, but I am really passionate about Spirit Airlines, and I also want to do a follow-up on that one about the Spirit card. So before you order that, I'm going to have a little bit of card info. Hopefully that comes out sometime like over the weekend. And thanks for joining me. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at the link on the screen, buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. That comes directly to me. It helps so much. You can also now support me with the thanks button on YouTube. I honestly have no idea how it works. They said I could turn it on. I turned it on, and now there's a thanks button. No one's done it yet. It's brand new. Someone said, "What is that?" I said, "I don't know. It lets you send a thanks. It's like send $1 or something." I don't know, but I think it'll be used on the live stream, so hopefully we'll see how it works. Share this with your friends. Tell people about the show, and I will see all of you, hopefully in just like 90 minutes on the live stream, and if not, tomorrow. And now on the screen, 4 awesome older videos that we have. Go check one of them out as your next one by going to another episode directly after the one you just watched. That's the #1 thing that tells YouTube that this show was awesome for you.